Good evening, now on Grampian. Frank Gilfeather is walking back to happiness in Dundee.
Walking back to happiness, oh yeah, yeah. Said goodbye to loneliness, oh yeah, yeah. I never knew I'd miss you, now I know what I must do. Walking back to happiness I shared with you. Yeah, 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 yeah. Making up for things I said, oh yeah, yeah. And mistakes to which they led.
Dundee, once the great city of jute, jam and journalism. At least it was when I grew up here. Today it's the city of discovery, with a new image and a new vitality. And over the next half hour I'd invite you to join me as I go walking back to happiness through the streets of my hometown, rediscovering some of my old haunts and perhaps meeting one or two old pals along the way. So what more can I say? It's up with the bonnets. Two of Dundee's great landmarks, the Tay Bridges. The rail bridge, famous unfortunately for that awful disaster in 1879 when the centre section collapsed as a train crossed from the Fife End. But it must be remembered that at one time the Tay rail bridge was once the longest rail crossing anywhere in the world, 1.5 miles from Dundee on one side to Wormit in Fife on the other. Now the Rhodes Bridge was built in the 1960s. And I was lucky enough to be at the official opening by Her Majesty the Queen Mother in August 1966. Today, 16,000 vehicles cross this every single day. But in the construction of this great jigsaw, there was a price to pay. Though not a greater price to pay than human life, the bridge also had a changing effect on the Dundee skyline. The Royal Arch, a colossal construction built to commemorate the visit of Queen Victoria to Dundee as she was en route with Prince Albert for Balmoral. It was, as you might expect, a great landmark and rendezvous point. Indeed, this marvellous piece of architecture, along with houses and shops on the path to the bridge, had to be demolished. We were at the time told it was all in the name of progress. You know, it's ironic that something as fine as this, built to welcome people to Dundee, was eventually pulled down to allow them to come and go as they pleased. And this is where it stood. Not only was it a tremendous piece of architecture, but it was a great meeting place for mums and dads and grannies and granddads and all the wee ones who would go through the arch towards the public swimming baths just on the edge of the river. That was by day, of course. In the evening, it was a different matter. You could meet your girlfriend and take her for some dancing at the Empress Ballroom nearby. Of course, it's not the kind of place you would like to meet somebody today, but it really does illustrate the changing face of Dundee. And quite close to here was one of the key areas of Dundee's wealth, the jute industry. Jute that trimmed the sails of the mighty tall ships as they took to the oceans of the world, and canvas that covered the wagons of those American pioneers who tamed the Wild West. Cox's Stack, a giant chimney, 282 foot high, and the centrepiece of the Cox Brothers jute empire here in the Lochie area of Dundee, which is where I come from. Now this, in fact, would have been the biggest complex of its kind anywhere in the world, and at one time it employed 6,000 people, mainly women. Many of those would have been Irish immigrants, and many more would have walked from as far away as Glasgow to find employment here. To them, just like those immigrants who were arriving in New York round about the same time, this was their Statue of Liberty. And Statue of Liberty it was to the thousands of people, including my own family, who lived and worked in this part of the city. Sadly, though, with developing technology and industrial evolution, the mills became casualties of change, and they've long since disappeared. Just as steam replaced sail and the combustion engine took the place of the horse and cart, it was inevitable that the demand for jute ceased. Well, despite the demise of the jute industry, fortunately all is not lost, because thanks to the Dundee Heritage Trust, a major project is underway to educate the new generation of Dundonians about life in the mills. And it's happening here at the Verdant Works. The man who's overseeing this entire project is Dave Hanton. He's going to tell me about this rather special museum in a minute. For the time being, though, we must remember that for generations of Dundee jute workers, this was how they started the day. Hi, Dave. How are you?
Hey, Frank.
Nice to see you. This is like something out of Charles Dickens, isn't it?
Beautiful, isn't it?
What went on here?
Administration, mill administration.
And would the manager be over there?
Manager had his little compartment at the back, sort of partitioned off for a bit of privacy, you know, not of the common.
You could just imagine the fear in here, really, with the workers and the manager, I guess.
Well, you could guess so. I mean, they had to stand and do their work. They wouldn't let us sit at these benches.
Is that right?
They had to stand.
The crazy thing is, I see that over there, there's a box. What's that all about?
Telephone box, the telephone. That's where the company telephone was held.
For the entire mill?
For the entire mill, yeah.
Well, I know we've got lots to see inside, so maybe you'd give me the grand tour, would you?
Certainly can, yeah. You just follow me.
Right, let's go.
What we've got in here, Frank, is a selection of machinery that we're going to be using to demonstrate the purpose. Not enough as you would have in a whole mill. But basically, it shows the softening process, broke the raw jute down, enabled it to be worked, added on oil and emulsion at this stage, because it was such a dry fibre at the time. Once it was softened, we'd go into the breaker card, it would break up the raw jute, turn into what we call a tow, or a fibrous mass. From the breaker card, the finisher card, that gave it another further combing, find it down. Then it'd be on the drawing frames to draw it out thin so as we could spin it off on the frames ready for the weavers to weave up the cloth.
The weavers were the creme de la creme, weren't they?
Yeah, they thought they were. They thought they were. Yeah, there was a distinct social structure between the factory and the mill. You know, I mean, I was a spinner, but I couldn't chat a weaver. She wouldn't go out with me.
Of course you couldn't. My mother was a weaver.
Well, there you go. You said I never married your mother, did I?
But tell me, another thing that I was going to ask you was about, they had a language all of their own, didn't they?
Oh, yeah.
In the mill.
Yeah. Well,
the noise was horrendous.
Yeah, the noise was too much to have a conversation. So, I mean, things like asking the time, you know, that's the time, they would tell you, or if I was wanting away for a break, I would sort of say, keep an eye on for the gaffer, 5 minutes smoke in there, okay? And they'd put the thumbs up and you'd disappear for 5 minutes, you know, and that would be the kind of thing. What's the time? So go like that to the guy at the bottom and see the clock, and he'd sort of go 3:15, and you go, oh, jings, you know, waiting again, this lot. So it would just, you made it up yourself, although it was recognised throughout with the mills. You can go from one mill to the next, and the language was understood. It was just a stone's throw from here that I went to St John's School, the school which was to set me up for life in the real world. But it was here in the Hawkhill part of the town that I received my early education. At that time, however, this had not attained university status. And it certainly wasn't academic. It was at the Hawkhill Amateur Boxing Club, along with dozens of other youngsters, that I learned to box, learning a healthy respect for my fellow man and being taught how to look after myself. The Lochie Boys Club is the only boxing gym still around from those days, and I really couldn't come back to Dundee without dropping in on one of the training sessions and some verbal sparring with my old corner man. Well, with me now is my old boxing coach from those days of the 60s in Dundee, Jim Monroe. Jim, what did you make of that?
Very good, very good. I think Peter was a wee bit overweight, and I think he was suffering. The legs were going quick.
And over the hill, I think.
Yeah, I think so, yes.
Jim, tell me, boxing was such a great sport in Dundee, wasn't it? Yeah. Right through the 40s, 50s, yes. 60s. Lots of great times.
Marvellous. You had about 12 clubs in Dundee, about 6 in the area, you know, and we were at Arbroath, Forfar, Montrose, Perth, every day of the week. We had 2 and 3 shows going on every week, all over the place. It was marvellous.
And the great thing about it was it brought lots of, like here at the Lochie Boys Club, it brought lots of local kids into the boxing clubs,
yes.
didn't it?
And the fathers and the mothers and the families supported them. They were marvellous, you know. Terrific seeing it. And they were youngsters. keeping them off the streets, you know, expending some of their energies. It was marvellous.
And learning how to look after themselves.
Yes, they got really coached by experienced coaches, yes. It was marvellous.
Now, Jim, the other great thing is, of course, there was lots of laughs in those days, wasn't there?
Yeah. Well, I remember one man, he was that nervous before the contest. When he came into the ring, he took his dressing gown off and he had no underpants on, you know. And that was really embarrassing. But you got nervous when the big contest came. You were always a bag of nerves, you know.
Well, a touch of overexposure there.
Yes, I would say that, yeah.
Anyway, Jim, let's see how Peter and young Jerry get on in the next round, shall we? Well, you could say boxing was one way of getting me closer to the stars, even though it was a little painful at times. Little did I know there was an easier way, and not very far from where I was trying to dodge the punches is the Mills Observatory, gifted to the city by John Mills, a local industrialist and keen astronomer. This little-known place of learning is Britain's only full-time public observatory, which is where I'd arranged to meet up with astronomer Brian Kelly, a man who spends most of his time stargazing.
Of the telescope onto the screen down here, and if you look down here you can see the outline of the sun itself, and that's a magnified view of the sun. Now you have to remember, of course, the sun's fairly big, so what we're looking at here is something that's almost 1 million miles from this side across here, and that means that you could fit about 100 Earths side by side all the way across the disk there. If you look down here at the bottom of the sun, you can actually see some sunspots today across there.
Brian, excuse me for interrupting your lesson.
It's good to see you, Frank.
Nice to see you.
I'll catch up with you later, girls.
Tell me something, would it be fair to describe this place as Dundee's best-kept secret?
I think you probably could say that, Frank, at least from one point of view, because up here in Balgay Hill we're completely surrounded by trees, so it's very difficult, in fact almost impossible, to see the observatory from anywhere around the city. But of course that's very important as far as the observatory is concerned, because all these trees protect us from the street lights, and that means the sky is nice and dark up here, making it ideal for the observatory itself.
Because I think I'm right in saying that originally the observatory was going to be on top of the law.
That's right. Originally the plans were to put the observatory there, but fortunately before the observatory was built, it was realised that that was a dreadful place for an observatory, a great place for a view of the city, but of course all the streetlights are shining straight up into the sky. You can see the moon, the brightest stars and planets, but that's about it. For a really good view of the sky, you want somewhere nice and dark like this.
So what kind of people, and what kind of groups, and how many people, in fact, a year come here?
At the moment, we're running around about 19,000 visitors a year, and these are people from all sorts of backgrounds, just individuals who happen to be interested in coming along and getting a chance to look through the telescope at the night sky, through to school groups and to other evening groups as well, women's guilds and cubs and scouts and so on. So we have a very large audience coming along to visit the observatory.
You're clearly an enthusiast.
Oh yes, definitely. It's a wonderful subject.
Since last year, 1 million more customers every week fill up with Esso. But why? Have we introduced a driver pampering program? Or funkier forecourts? Or is it that since starting Price Watch, we've kept Esso fuels at supermarket prices? There's only one way to find out.
The Dundee Repertory Theatre. For more than 50 years now, the Rep, as it's affectionately known, has launched the careers of many a famous actor and actress, and even budding playwrights like myself. Yes, there's a little Alan Ayckbourn and Tom Stoppard in everyone. And it was here that my very own play, The Harp and the Violet, was staged in November 1991.
Well, the man who helped me through that process of playwriting and to produce the play The Harp and the Violet here at Dundee Rep was the man most of you will recognise as Dr. Stephen Andrews from the hit television series Taggart. But of course it's Robert Robertson. Robert, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Frank.
17 years here as the theatre director. Dundee's a bit of an unlikely place for a repertory company, is it not?
I think you can be forgiven for thinking that, perhaps, Frank. I mean, you know what Dundee is like. It's a very homely, down-to-earth sort of place. And the last sort of venue that one associates as a sort of a centre of excellence in artistic endeavour. But in fact, it's significant, in fact, that the original theatre company started in the first few months of World War II.
Yes.
And people thought, why are they opening a theatre at this time? And it went through some pretty dodgy times, but eventually it became one of the great forcing grounds for new talent in Great Britain.
Well, absolutely. It's been a tremendous breeding ground for many of the big names.
Absolutely.
Yes. Pick out one or two for us that you remember. I mean, you have directed many, many productions here as well.
Yes, indeed. I mean, one thinks immediately of names, the first one, of course, being Richard Todd. Virginia McKenna, Glenda Jackson, James Bolam. I mean, the endless. Michael York, another one that springs to mind. But for me personally, I think Phyllis Logan was the one that I thought, yes, this young lady has got it. And given a fair crack of the whip, she will make her mark. And I'm delighted to be able to say that she has gone on to do so.
Oh, Robert, 17 years as theatre director here at the Rep. There must be some funny stories around. Give us one, would you?
Yes, there are a number. Unfortunately, most of them I can't relay on the on the public broadcasting service. But I can remember playing Long John Silver. This again was up in the Lochie Road. And like all Christmas shows, you have a fair number of the school parties. And we used to use the auditorium as a means of getting on stage quite often. So there I was in my long frock coat with my leg stuck up my backside, strapped up, and the crutch under my arm and the parrot on my shoulder, coming through the back of the auditorium, and there was all a great group of these little Dundee hard men who spent the rest of the afternoon trying to take the crutch from underneath my arm. And on one occasion, very nearly succeeded, and I nearly measured my length and just managed to stop myself by clutching at a seat. But, oh no, I think there were all sorts of things which went on, both there and in the new theatre here, which there was always a source of joy as well as satisfaction.
Well, just a stone's throw from Dundee Rep was another great place of entertainment in Dundee, the Pally Ballroom. It was here for one night a week on a Sunday that the Pally became the top 10 club, with all the big name acts from the so-called hit parade of the day coming here to entertain thousands of Dundee teenagers like myself. And the man who was the impresario at that time was just in his 20s, and he was the person who was responsible for introducing the Beatles to Scotland.
Twist and shout, twist and shout. Come on, come on, come on, come on, baby now. Come on, baby, come on.
Yes, and all that twisting and shouting and the so-called Beatlemania that accompanied them. Andy Lothian, one-time showbiz impresario of the 60s, but today he runs a more reserved financial consultancy.
Andy, we're surrounded by 60s memorabilia
It's good,
here.
isn't it, Frank?
It's
Yeah,
great.
it's good.
I'll tell you what, lots of people will not remember that you were the man who introduced the Beatles
I can't remember, Frank.
to Scotland. Tell me about that. How did that come about?
Well, we had the Beatles, Albert Benicio Velgan and I. We had them for 10 days in 1963, and we paid them £40 a night.
Between them?
Between them, and we lost money, Frank. We lost money. And because we wanted them back to try and make our money up, we asked Brian Epstein if he would give us them at £30 a night. Brian said no, charged us £500 a night, which is like £10,000 a night now, Frank. And we booked them, and we had them in Dundee, Kirkcaldy and Glasgow in October 1963, and we made a fortune, Frank.
So tell me, Andy, who were the other big names that you brought here to Dundee and indeed to Scotland in general?
We had almost all the big names at that time, Frank, as you probably remember. We had groups like the Hollies, we had the Dave Clark Five, we had Manfred Mann, we had Freddie and the Dreamers, all appearing at the Pally. And of course, one of the interesting things is that we also had some terrific local talent. Our main band was a band called Tommy Dean and the Tremors from Aberdeen. There was a band came down regularly from Elgin called the Copycats, and our own Johnny Hudson High Four from Dundee. And interestingly enough, a Perth band called the Vikings, who a few years later became the Average White Band in the main, and then a band from Dunfermline called the Red Hawks, and they went on to become Nazareth. So Dundee particularly, top 10 club on a Sunday night, had some fantastic names between 1963 and about 1967 or 8. Every Sunday there was a big name at the Pally, and 1,400 kids came to the Pally on a Sunday night.
Any tantrums? Not from you, but from the acts. Any difficult ones?
Oh, some good stuff. We had the Kinks, I remember, fell down the back stairs and broke some of their arms and legs and were carted off to hospital. We always had to try and separate all the young ladies from the groups, and that was difficult because there was no barrier in the Pally. It's only a foot, and the groups were kind of always in danger. But it was good fun. There wasn't the same kind of trouble, or didn't appear to be then, Frank, as there is now.
I'm looking around this table, and despite the fact you were the man who brought the Beatles, you were the man who brought so many big names to Dundee and to Scotland, no picture of you with the Beatles. Why is that?
Frank, I was a jazz man. At the age of 20, my band, the East Coast Jazzmen, we were the Scottish Jazz Band champions, and I was a purist. And at the same time as we were trying to preserve the tradition of jazz in Scotland, these upstart, these rock groups came, the Beatles with their guitars. And I regret to say, it's one of my great regrets in my life, that I held on to this kind of wonder of jazz throughout the period that year that the Beatles were big. And it was sad to say, but I felt if I was photographed with them, in some way I would be demeaning my profession.
You're a musical snob.
A musical snob, absolutely. I regret it and I apologise, and I'll never do it again.
Sunday night at the Top 10 Club brought the weekend nicely to a close, but of course the previous day you could be cheering your team on Saturday afternoon at one of Dundee's 2 football grounds. Like thousands of other Dundonians, I always looked forward to the derby matches between Dundee and Dundee United, either across the road at Dens Park or here at Tannadice. And you know the great thing about going to Dens Park or here at Tannadice? If the football was rubbish, you could always take comfort in one of these, a Wallace's pie. Love it. Discovery Point, and home to the Dundee-built Royal Research ship Discovery, the ship that took Scott, Shackleton and many more polar explorers to a land where no one had gone before, the Antarctic. And today, Dundonians can feel for themselves the kind of atmosphere those heroic men of history must have experienced. Now, I don't know what it is, but there's a sort of newness about this part of the town. Perhaps it's here that the renaissance of Dundee is at its most obvious. When Discovery returned to her home and birthed here, it was a special moment for the city. In fact, in many ways, it marked the rebirth of Dundee. There's now a definite buzz about the town, and more importantly, certainly for the local economy, people now come here to visit and don't just pass through. Mind you, long before the Discovery was brought back here to Dundee, and of course before the Tay Road Bridge was built, this was the point of departure for the Fifies. And those were the ferry boats which took people from Dundee across to Newport on Tay on the other side of the river. And it was a big day, for instance, on Easter Sunday, when hundreds of mums and dads and the wee ones would board the Fifey and go off across the water to roll their eggs. And this is the place to be if you want to see the best possible views of Dundee. It's from here on the top of the Law that you could see every single area of the city. And if, like me, you're a Dundonian, how can you fail not to feel a pride in this great city?
Happiness, whoop, oh, yeah.
And that was the last in this series of Walking Back to Happiness. However, Frank Gilfeather will be back in '97 with more top clubs. Meanwhile, next tonight we're off down Coronation Street.
Making up for things I said, whoop-ah, yeah, yeah, and mistakes to which they led, whoop-ah, yeah, yeah, I shouldn't have gone away.
For the original sunshine breakfast, take a bowl, a round one is good, and fill with golden flakes of corn. One's ripened by 140 days of sun are best. Next, take some ice-cold milk, give it a little shake, and pour over the light and crispy flakes. Now take a spoon, one like this is fine, and enjoy the delicious taste you only get from Kellogg's cornflakes.
Kellogg's Cornflakes, the original and best.
Bacteria multiply at an incredible rate when they're in a